Hello, Algebra 1 students. Once again, we are back factoring. Today we're going to actually learn how to factor a quadratic trinomial. Once again, as in the notes from topic 5E, if you're listening to this straight from YouTube and not from the play pause it in Canvas where it has the questions, it stops and asks you questions along the way, then you might want to stop and go find the version on Canvas through play pause it, so that way you can answer the questions and get credit for the notes assignment. All right, so let's get started. So today our goal is, what is the goal of factoring quadratic trinomials? What are we trying to achieve? How are we trying to achieve that? That's what we're trying to figure out today. So if you remember, a quadratic trinomial is ax squared plus bx plus c, right? It's to the power of 2 and there's 3 terms. So that is going to be the focus on what we're doing today. So here, we're going to start with, if you see the first problem here, it says to multiply. So we're going to start with this multiplication problem. So here we go. So we have 2x minus 1 times x plus 3. So I'm going to use the multiplication box because you know I like to use the box to do this multiplying. So we have 2x and minus 1, and we have x, and we have 3, right? This is what our quiz is going to be on this week. This is the stuff we learned last week and we've been practicing in your homework. All right, so 2x times x, 2x squared. 2x times 3 is 6x. X times negative 1 is negative 1x, or just negative x, your choice. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3, right? So I'm multiplying the box so I can clearly see all my terms. I'm going to take all 4 terms out of the box right now. So I have 2x squared plus 6x minus 1x minus 3. So if you'll notice, we have 4 terms here, right? And then we take these 4 terms and we simplify those two by combining those middle 2 terms together. And we get 2x squared plus 5x minus 3, right? So our answer is this quadratic trinomial, right? So I'm starting here because really what we're doing today is going backwards, right? So let's look over here. It says we are now going to learn how to take 2x squared plus 5x minus 3, right? And if you'll notice, that's the exact same thing that's right there. And we are going to find its two, fill in the blank here, is factors. We're going to call these the factors, right? So we're going to find its two factors, and these will be two binomials. So if we look up here, right, these two guys up here, these are two binomials. I can't draw an arrow very well. My bad. All right, so 2x minus 1 times x plus 3, those were two binomials. We multiplied together to get 2x squared plus 5x minus 3. So we're going to be going back and forth today. All right, so I have put this problem down here. We already know the answer, right? 2x squared plus 5x minus 3. I'm going to go through the steps and show how to get to that answer by the process of factoring. This is a process. This is something you're going to have to learn how to do. Come to our live class on Wednesday and we will be doing practice on this. So that way we can hopefully start to get the process and understand what we are doing. So step number 1 down below says to make sure the trinomial is in standard form. If it is not, rewrite it, right? So let's write what standard form is just as a reminder. Remember, standard form means that you're from biggest to smallest. So these quadratic trinomials, the first term is the squared term, so ax squared is what we call that, plus bx, the middle term has the x, and then plus c is our constant at the end. So we should have the squared term, then the x term, and then the constant, just the number. All right, the next thing we're going to check is we're going to check to see if there is a GCF to factor out. Our 5E notes were all about the GCF. If there is a GCF, that's the next step. We always, in factoring, take that GCF out. For today's notes, there is no GCF because I want us to practice the process of factoring. Next week, when we do our 5F notes, we will throw in a GCF and we'll practice doing that extra step. But that is something that you always have to check on factoring. So no matter what problem you're asked to factor, first thing we should always check for is a GCF. Step 2 is a super important one to always do. All right, so now we're down to step 3. So step 3 down here, this is where we're getting into the heart of actual factoring. It says to box the bx term of the trinomial, including the sign out front. this is what we need. If you, you should be reading your notes hopefully, but this is what we need to split in step 4. So here, on my problem up above here, I'm going to take and we are going to box this term right here. This is the term. With that, remember that plus sign. So it's plus 5x. That plus sign has to go with that 5x. We're going to box that term because we're going to split this apart. We are going to split it apart eventually. Not yet, but we are going to be splitting it. That's why I draw some little legs down there. And then we're going to multiply a times c. So if we go down to step 3, it says then multiply a times c. And then it says this will be the number we use to find the factors that we're going to use to split the bx term. So this multiplication is important because it's going to help us figure out what we're going to do. So I like to draw a box on the top here, and then I draw a multiplication symbol, and then I draw these 2 little hands like this, and it reminds me of multiplying those first 2 number, or the first coefficient and the last number. So 2 times -3 is -6. If you look at this whole little, if we look at what we have up here, we started calling this the robot because it kind of looks like a robot, right? It's like a little one-eyed robot. He has little arms to grab the 2 and the -3. He has his little legs that we're going to use later to split that 5x apart. So think of it as a robot if you want to. Don't have to think of it as a robot if you want. If you don't want to draw the box around that -6 up top, you can just write a -6 above your boxed 5x. That is fine. But -6 is the key here because -6, I'm going to write it down over here, is what we are going to use to find factors like we were finding with our GCF stuff yesterday, or well, not yesterday, maybe you did it earlier today, but in our 5E notes, and that so that we can split apart the 5x. That's our goal, right? So now we're going to find the factors of AC. So if we go down to number 4, it says step 4, find the factors of AC, right? So that's 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Those are the factors. Now, the key here, and let's go down here to 4 and talk about it, then we'll come back up to our problem, is that if the product is positive, so let's start with a positive product. Our product is not positive, our product's negative. So let's do the positive ones first. But if the product is positive, right, then we are looking for factors that will add together to give us the bx term, right? Because if it's positive, we add 2 things together. Positive means addition, or can mean addition. Since we are adding the sign on the b term, we'll determine if the factors are both positive or negative, right? So if it's a negative b term, then it would be a negative plus a negative. If it's a positive b term, it's a positive plus a positive. So that's if my product is positive. We'll do some examples of that here in a bit. Our example here, right, if the product is negative, this is what we're going to be working on right now to finish up this problem. So if the product is negative, then we are looking for factors with opposite signs to give us that bx term, right? We're looking for the opposite signs this time to give us that bx term, right? We want the signs to be opposite because if the signs are opposite, then we are going to subtract. Since we are subtracting, or right, we're subtracting here, or adding the opposite signs, the sign on the b term dictates that the bigger factor is positive or negative, right? Because if we want this, if the b term is negative, then we want the bigger factor to be negative. If the b term is positive, we want the bigger factor to be positive. So when we subtract, the answer is correctly either positive or negative, right? So if we go up here, let's go back up to our problem. I'm going to go back up here to the top here. And I like to do this, and you'll see me as we do this example problems. When I write down my -6 to factor it, before I even do the factors, I like to write this. Since it's a subtraction problem, I'm going to write, we're going to subtract, move it over just a little bit more, subtract 2 positive 5x, right? Since the sign is negative, we know we have to subtract, and we want our answer to be positive. So let's go ahead and make a note of that. I'm going to move over just a little bit more so I have room to make my note here. And I'll make my note in red so it's nice and clear, right? So since the signs will be opposite, and the bx term, right, that term in the middle that we boxed, so the bx term is also positive, since the signs will be opposite, and the bx term is positive, the bigger factor will be positive. Right? So since the signs will be opposite and the bx term is positive, the bigger factor will be positive. Now remember, I'm not going to give you big pauses to write, so feel free to hit pause if you're still writing so you can finish writing, and then hit play to join us back over at the problem, right? So if I'm over here and I'm looking at my problem, I have 1 minus 6 and 2 minus 3. So we're subtracting. So 1 minus 6 is 5, 2 minus 3 is 1. We want it to be 5. So my 1 minus 6 is my factors, and we're going to subtract to a positive 5x. So the 6 has to be positive. The 1 has to be negative, because we want it to be, because 6 minus 1 is a positive 5. All right, so now we're going to come back over here, and let's just go down to step 5. All right, so once we have identified our factors down here in step 5, we are going to factor by grouping to find the two binomial factors. So to do this, I want us all to draw a line down the middle of the two terms that we found that add up to the product of AC. We will then factor the GCF from the first two terms and factor a different GCF from the second two terms, right? So the line down the middle is going to separate us into two small binomials that need to be factored. This will give us a like binomial that is one of our binomials. We will then combine that together. So I'll show you how that all works. So let's go back up here to our problem. Right, so if we look back here at our little robot guy here, right, our robot guy has some feet over here. All right, so we have these feet because we're splitting 5x into negative 1x and 6x, right? This 5x has to split apart to the negative 1 and 6. That's why we found the factor pairs, and then we use that to figure out how to split that 5x. So I'm going to start by writing the 2x squared because it stays the same, and then we're going to split. It does not matter which one goes first, the negative 1 or the 6, totally your choice. So I'm going to put minus 1x, right? That's my first split. And then plus 6x, that's my second split, because negative 1x plus 6x is 5x, right? Those go together. And then we're going to put the minus 3 at the end. So really, this is the four terms, and I'm going to go back up here. If we go back up here, that should look vaguely familiar. 2x squared plus 6x minus 1x minus 3, right? When we multiplied those out and had four terms. These are those four terms. As I said, it could be 6x first or negative 1x, does not matter. So once we have the four terms, that's when we're going to draw that line down the middle. So I'm going to draw a line here before the plus 6x. Make sure the sign is with the coefficient for that x. So I have 2x squared minus 1x on the left side of the wall, and then I have plus 6x minus 3 on the right side. And then what you're going to do is you're going to look at just that 2x squared minus 1x, and you're going to find the GCF. So if I have a 2 and a 1, the only common factor they have is 1. Right? So the number, we have a 1 here. If you want to write the 1, go ahead. We don't always write it. And then we have x squared and x. You're going to take out an x, and you'll find that you're always going to take out a variable for the first set of the first two terms, because there's always going to be an x squared in the first one. There's always going to be an x in the second one on these quadratic trinomial problems. All right? So then we're going to divide that out. So if I have 1x on the outside, right? And then we divide it out. 2 divided by 1 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 1 divided by 1 is negative 1, and then x divided by x is 1. So the left-hand side simplified to 1x times 2x minus 1. Now we do the same thing on the right. So I'm going to, but this time we're going to find the GCF of these. So I have a 6 and I have a 3. So the GCF of 6 and 3, if you need to write out your list, you can, right? Factors of 6 are 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Factors of 3 are only 1 and 3. So if 3 divides into 6, it is my GCF. There is no x on the last term, so there is no x in the second grouping. There's no variable. So this is a 3 out front. 6 divided by 3 is 2 times that x. And then negative 3 divided by 1 is negative 1. Or negative 3 divided by 3, I apologize, is negative 1. All right, so now we've factored out GCF in the first group. We've factored out a GCF in the second group. If you notice here, change this to green here, this and this must be exactly the same. The whole point on doing this is to get these two things in parentheses to be the same. because if they're the same, we have 2x minus 1 in both of those, then we can take this guy here and this guy here, and we can put them together, x plus 3, or 1x plus 3 if you want, right? This is my answer. So let's make a note. I'm going to scoot this over here a little bit. And then I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to make a note here that need to be exactly the same. All right, those need to be exactly the same. That is what we're doing. We are taking that, boxing that middle term, and then we're going to split it apart using the factors of the first and last number. Since we're using those factors, it's going to let us split that apart so that we can factor it by grouping. That is why this process works, right? I know it's a big process and it's a lot. So you're going to bear with me. We'll do some problems together. We'll do some more problems on Wednesday. It'll start to make sense the more you practice. If you don't practice it, you're never going to master it. This is one of the #1 things that we use every single year in your math career from here on out. So it's a very important topic. All right, so then what's it say? Then the result from the factoring step 5 are the binomial factors. It is always a good idea to check each binomial to make sure you did not miss a GCF in step 2. We will talk about that in our next set of notes next week about missing, if we miss it, if you do miss it, that's fine. Then you just need to make sure you take it out at the end. But we will talk about all of that more next week. Right now, we're just going to practice factoring. All right, so that is in a nutshell how it's going to work. So let's go on to page 14. And let's do some factoring. We're going to do some factoring together. So here we go. So I have 2x squared plus 5x plus 3. So here's the process. I will walk you through it. First thing we're going to do is we're going to box that middle term. And then we're going to, I like to make my little robot guy. We're going to pull that 2 and that 3, and we're going to multiply them together and give us a positive 6. So positive 6 is what we're going to use to split apart that 5x. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to put a plus 6. And then I'm going to note, since it's positive, we are going to add 2, and then the box term is 5x. So our goal is to add 2 numbers together to get to positive 5x. And we're going to find those 2 numbers by finding the factors of 6. I'm going to make a note here in red again underneath, right? It can be helpful as we're doing our notes to keep looking for these patterns. These are things you don't need to keep writing down if you start to see the patterns. But since this is a positive 5x right here, then we know that we're adding, right? So, and we know that both signs are positive. We know that both signs have to be positive for our addition problem, right? So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to find my factors. I have 1 times 6. I have 2 times 3. Those are the only factors. We need to add. So 1 plus 6 is 7. That one does not work. 2 plus 3 is 5. That one does work. Both signs are going to be positive because it is a positive 5x. So that is good. Now I'm going to come over here real quick and move this over a little bit. And then we are going to go ahead and split apart our robot guys, right? So we have 2x squared. I will call him a robot guy. I like calling him a robot guy. And then we're going to go plus 2x and plus 3x and plus 3, right? So we split that 5x into 2x and 3x. Now I'm going to take and draw my line down the middle here. And then we're going to factor the left 2, and we're going to factor the right 2. So here, I have 2 and 2 as my coefficient, so we can divide out a 2. And then we have x squared and x, so we can take out a 2x from both of those. So we're going to divide out 2x, put that out front. 2 divided by 2 is 1. X squared divided by x is x. 2 divided by 2 is 1. It's a positive 1. X divided by x is 1. So I have 2x times 1x plus 1. And then I'm going to divide out of this last 2 here. We'll take a 3 out. 3 divided by 3 is 1 times that x. 3 divided by 3 is 1. So again, remember, if these 2 binomials on either side of your wall are not exactly the same, then there is a problem with our factoring. Most of the time, it's very well, go back and look at your factors and also look at your signs, because we'll look as we go down. I think the next problem, you'll see that signs become important too when we're doing these problems. So we have, here we go. We got 1x plus 1 is one of my factors. And then my other factor are what's out front. So we put those together. 2x plus 3. And it does not matter which order you put the binomials in. So I'm going to make a note of that here, right? I'll put does not. Let me move it over a little bit so I have enough room to write. Does not matter which binomial is first. It is your choice, right? So you could write 2x plus 3, and it also doesn't matter if you put that 1 in front of that binomial, the one coefficient can be on there or not. So you could have 1x plus 1 or just x plus 1, either way, right? So I'm going to write is the same. It does not matter which way you do it, your choice. So whichever order you want to put them in is fine. If you want to put the binomial first, like I was, the like binomial first, and then put the other two together, or put the other two together and then put the like binomial, that is totally your choice. They're the same thing. Because multiplication, was that multiplication, the commutative property multiplication says you multiply in either order. All right. So we've done 2 now. I know. Pause me if you need to pause me and process. We are going to keep going. I'm going to do a few more problems here so we can just keep practicing all the different signs being negative, signs being positive, and all that stuff. All right, so here. So I have 2x squared minus 5x plus 2. So I'm going to box that middle term. So I'm boxing that negative 5x. Right, and then we're going to pull and figure out, so 2 times 2 is a positive 4. So positive 4 is what we're going to use to factor. So I'm going to put the positive 4 over here so I have enough room. Since it's positive, we are going to add, since it's positive, 2, and then the box term is negative 5x. And since it is a negative 5x, in our notes it can be helpful to write these little clues down as we're doing this, right? That since we're adding, the signs are the same, so that means that both signs are negative, right? Both of the signs for the factors are going to be negative because of this negative 5x. So we're adding 2 numbers and they're both going to be negative. So I'm going to go back over here and do my factors of 4. I have 1 times 4 and 2 times 2. I need to add them together to get 5. 1 plus 4 is in fact 5. Right? So that has to be my factor pairs because 2 plus 2 is 4, it's not 5. And since they both have to be negative, it's going to be a negative 4 and a negative 1. They're both negative because negative 4 plus negative 1 is negative 5. So going back over here to my robot guy, we're going to split it apart. So I start with my 2, let's go this way, what's going on? 2x squared minus 1x. I like to put the 1 in there, minus 4x plus 2. You can just put minus x if you want, not a 1x, but I don't mind having the 1 in there. Right, once we have our 4 terms, we're going to take and we're going to split apart those 4 terms, and now we have our groups of 2 to factor. So I look at the first one, I have 2 and 1, so my GCF, I could take out a 1 for the number, and then x squared and x is just an x. So we're just dividing out an x. You can put a 1x or just x if you prefer, your choice. 2 divided by 1 is 2, x squared divided by x is x. 1x divided by 1x is 1, so negative 1 divided by 1 is negative 1, x divided by x is 1. So I have x times 2x minus 1. That's my first binomial factoring. My second binomial factoring, this is one of the ones that becomes a little important note to make here, is that when we go to take out our GCF here, if the leading coefficient is a negative, then so the leading coefficient is the one that's in front of it's right by the wall, that red wall I drew. If that's negative, you need to divide that out. So when we look at 4 and 2, the GCF of 4 and 2 is 2, but because it's a negative 4 out front, we need to take out a negative 2, right? So let's make a note of that over here. If leading coefficient is negative, need to divide out the negative as part of GCF. right? So if that negative is upright, if you forget to do it, then you will not have two matching binomials in the next step, and that will hopefully remind you to go up and take that negative out, right? So negative 2 is my GCF. Negative 4 divided by negative 2 is positive 2. 2 divided by negative 2 is negative 1, right? If we did not take out that negative, then these two resulting binomials would not be exactly the same. So you have to take out that negative. And so we have 2x minus 1 times, and then here I have an x, and here I have a minus 2. So this becomes x minus 2. That's how you get that negative on that other side, right? So 2x minus 1 times x minus 2. Okay, so that's one of those key things. It's going to be true for all factoring. Anytime the very first term in the entire factoring process is negative, then you should be taking out a negative all the way through. A negative leading coefficient is a GCF. It has of -1 or negative, in this case, -2, because that was my biggest GCF. All right, that is, I think, the last of like different things to look at. So now we're just going to do a couple more problems practice. So here, number 3 here, I'm going to box my -9x, kind of wrote over a little bit of space here, but 2 times -5 is -10. So -10 is what we're going to use to figure out how to split 9x. Go like a 10. All right, so I'm going to go over here and write my -10. That's what I'm going to factor. -10 means that we are going to subtract 2. My box term is -9x. And since my box term is -9x, then that means that the bigger number is, that's what number? Negative. Because we're subtracting and it has to be a negative, subtract to a negative number, that means the bigger factor needs to be negative. So remember that when we do our factor pairs. So I have 1 times 10, 2 times 5. Those are my only factor pairs. So 10 minus 1 is 9, right? So this is my factor pairs because 5 minus 2 is 3, it's not 9. So 10 minus 1 is 9. These are my factor pairs. I circled them. And now we need to make the bigger number negative. So it's going to be a -10. Right? It needs to be a -10 because we need to have it, it needs to break into -9, right? So here we are. I have 2x squared, and then I have plus 1x minus 10x minus 5, because we split the -9x into 1x minus 10x. And then I'm going to draw my wall down the middle here. So I can do my two factor pairs, two factor, right? So here, my GCF on the first one, I have 2 and 1, so that's just a 1. X squared and x means that's a 1x. So I'm dividing out an x or a 1x, either way, right? Either way, I don't care. 2 divided by 1 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. 1x divided by 1x is 1. 1 divided by 1 is 1, right? So that's 2x plus 1. If we multiply this back out, it ends up being 2x squared plus 1x. And then over here, dividing out again, my leading coefficient here is a -10. So that means we need to take out a negative, and then I look at 10 and 5, I can divide 5 out of both of those. That's my GCF. So I'm going to take out a -5. -10 divided by -5 is +2 times that x. -5 divided by -5 is a +1, right? So that means we have 2x plus 1 and 2x plus 1. If we did not take a -5 out, this would not be 2x minus plus 1, right? That's what becomes important. So I have 2x plus 1 is my one binomial. X minus 5 is my second binomial. All right, we got one more problem down here. All right, so we have boxing the 9. We're going to pull the 2 and the -35. That's -70. So -70 means that we are going to subtract, because it's negative, 2. The box term is 9x. And since the box term is positive, that means the bigger number is positive when we look at factors, because we're subtracting, so they're going to be opposite signs. So I look at my factors of 70. I have 1 times 70, 2 times 35, 3 does not go in, 4 does not go in, 5 times 14, 6 does not go in, 7 times 10. I'm doing those quickly for you. I already have them done. All right, so which one of these numbers subtract to 9? So 70 minus 1 is 69. That does not work. 35 minus 2 is 33. That is not 9. 14 minus 5 is 9. So here's my factor pairs. And then the bigger number is positive, so that means that the 5 is going to be negative. So I go over here, right, split apart with my little feet, or little legs, 2x squared minus 5x plus 10x minus 35. Draw my wall down the middle. Oh, it's not a very good wall, sorry. Probably a good idea not, I'm going to redo my wall. Because some of us, we do that. We draw things and then we cover up our signs and then we mess up our answer because we covered up part of our sign. So careful when you're drawing your walls. All right, so 2 and 5 has a GCF of 1, right? It's the only number I can take out of 2 and 5. X squared and x is just an x. So that means I have x out front. 2 divided by 1 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 5 divided by 1 is negative 4. So I have 2x minus 4. Minus 4? That's not right. Oy. Let's try that again. How about negative 5 divided by 1 is negative 5? That makes more sense. 2x minus 5. And then looking at my second grouping of numbers here, I have 10 and I have 35. So my GCF of these two, I can take a 5 out of both of those, right? Both of those can divide out a 5. So 10 divided by, let's put the 5 out front. 10 divided by 5 is 2 times that x. Negative 35 divided by 5 is negative 7. What did I do wrong? Oh, why did I put a 10 there? Oh, Mrs. Kim. Let's go back. It wouldn't be Mrs. Kim notes if I didn't make a total mistake here. Let's go here, and I'm going to cross off this here. Should not be a 10. It should be a 14, right? Because 14 is the number that we were using. I looked at the bottom one. See, another mistake we often make when we're doing this math. Should have been negative 5 and positive 14, not negative 5 and positive 10. Apologize for that. So now that'll help us fix. Because I was looking at it going, that didn't work. I knew when I started dividing out, they weren't the same. Something was wrong. I went and found my mistake. My mistake was I wrote down the wrong factors. So now I can divide out a 7 out of both of these. All right, so 7 comes out front. 14 divided by 7 is 2 times x. The negative 35 divided by 7 is negative 5. This does work, right? I knew I had a mistake because I didn't have 2x minus 5 in both of my binomials. Right, so check those. If something's wrong, go back and look. First thing I looked at was over here at my factor pairs, and then I looked back up at what I wrote down and realized I did not write the same thing down that I had circled. So that's something that happens to us. So my answer is 2x minus 5 times x plus 7. Right, 2x minus 5, and then here's my x plus 7. My x plus 7 right there. Okay. All right, hang with me. We're getting there. We'll be done shortly now that we've got this process down. Next two problems, we're gonna do the next two problems. This is really just a few more. So let's just keep going through this process. If you're getting the process, then you can try solving them first and then check to make sure your work is correct. Just make sure you're answering the questions as they come on the play posit. All right, so here we go. So let me zoom up a little bit, make this a little bit bigger. Here we go. So we're boxing for x. We're pulling 1 times negative 32 is negative 32. So negative 32 are my factor pairs. It's negative, so we're going to subtract 2. The box term is a positive 4x. Since the box term is a positive 4x, then that means that the bigger number is positive, right? We're subtracting, so they have opposite signs. Bigger number is positive. Just keep reminding us what all these things mean. These are things you don't have to keep writing as you understand when you're doing your homework, but it's helpful when you're learning. All right, so 1 times 32. And then I have 2 times 16. And then I have 4 times 8. These are the factors of 32. So we need to find which ones subtract to 4x. So 32 minus 1 is 31. That doesn't work. 16 minus 2 is 14. That does not work. 8 minus 4 is in fact 4. And the bigger number is positive. That means it's going to be a negative 4. So let's see if I can record these ones correctly this time. I have x squared. And then I have, oops, that's not the right sign though. Minus 4x plus 8x minus 32. So here we go. These are my 4 terms, right? We need to get to 4 terms. We're going to draw my wall, keep me organized. And then we're going to factor out here. So, come back. Let me move this over just a little bit. There we go. All right, here we go. So we're going to divide out. There's a 1 and a 4, so that's just a 1, and then x squared and x. So that first GCF of these first two is just x. Because if there's a 1 out front, then my GCF has to be 1. So dividing out an x, and then I have x minus 4. Because x squared divided by x is x. Negative 4 divided by 1 is negative 4, and then x divided by x is 1. And over on this side, we're going to divide out. I have 8 and 32, so that's 8. The 8 is positive, so it's a positive 8. And then 8 divided by 8 is 1. So I have 1x minus 4, which these are the same. 1x and x are the same thing, right? So these guys are the same. So I have x minus 4 times x plus 8. All right. So seems pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead now and do number 6 here. So negative 9x. We're going to pull the 1 times 20, so that's a positive 20. We put a positive sign. So positive 20 means we're going to add to negative 9x. Since we're adding to a negative number, that means both signs are negative in this, right? Both numbers are going to be negative. So let's look at my factors. I have 1 times 20. I have 2 times 10. I have 4 times 5. Those are the factor pairs of 20. We need to add to negative 9. Both signs we're adding. So 1 and 20 is 21. 2 and 10 is 12. 4 and 5 is 9. Those are my adding, and they're both going to be negative. Right? So we split this apart. We have x squared minus 4x minus 5x plus 20. Right? And then I draw my wall down the middle here. And then divide out a GCF of x out of both of these. So I have x times x minus 4. This leading GCF of this one, remember, is negative, so take a negative out. And then it's 5 and 20, so that's a negative 5. Negative 5 divided by negative 5 is 1x. Negative 20 divided by negative 5 is a negative 4. Right, so x minus 4, because these are the same, and then x minus 5. Now, take a look at 4, 5, and 6 right now. What do you notice about these? Do you notice a pattern here? I'm going to kind of show you this quick shortcut, but it doesn't. You don't need to use it. You don't need to memorize it. You don't even, if you don't like shortcuts or you're struggling enough just to remember this factorization, then you don't need to worry about it. But if you notice when you're looking, why are we curved, crooked? All right, we're looking at the numbers above here. You should notice that the A term for both of these is a 1. And so what we're going to see here is that if you have a trinomial, ax squared plus bx plus c, and the a is 1, the a has to be 1. If the a is any number other than 1, then this shortcut doesn't work. Then really, the binomial terms you found here, if you look here, we found negative 4, negative 5. Those dump directly into the answer. So finding the binomial pairs, you still got to find the binomial pairs. Once you find the binomial pairs, you have your answer. You don't even need to worry about doing all of that stuff in the middle. So let's take a quick look at this little shortcut. It only works though if a is 1. If a is not 1, you cannot do this. You have to box that middle term, find the binomial pairs, and then draw your wall and do all of that. It only works if a is 1. So if I look at this problem here, right? So if I look here, here's my 11x, still helpful to know that, right? And we're trying to find positive 30. So if I think about positive 30, And my factors here, I have 1 and 30, I have 2 and 15, I have 3 and 10, and I have 5 and 6. And we are trying to, remember, because it's positive, we're adding to a positive 11x. 5 and 6 are 11. 5 and 6, they both need to be positive because it's a positive 11. So we can go straight to here, right? These are both going to have an x in the front because it's 1x squared. So x and x, and then it's going to be from here, it's going to be a positive 5 and a positive 6. So you can go straight to your answer if there is a 1 out front. If and only if there's a 1 out front of that ax squared is a 1. If it's any other number, it does not work. All right. All right, so number 8 over here. So number 8 is also, it has a 1 out front, right? So box that term here. And then we have negative 24 when we pull those guys. So if I think about negative 24, I have 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6. I am trying to subtract this time to 2, right? So it's a positive 2x, right? We're going to subtract 2 positive 2x. So when I look at these ones, these two are my subtraction. And we need to be a positive 2x. That means that the 6 needs to be positive, the 4 needs to be negative. So we can go straight to our answer. This has to be an x. That has to be an x. X minus 4, x plus 6. So it just cuts out a little bit of work there in the middle. Sometimes you can even start, I talked about the guess and check here. I'm not going to really show that right now, but you can even guess and check that. You just plug in and you try to find numbers that work. Some teachers like to teach it that way. I prefer to have a method because when it gets harder, the problems get harder. They're not that hard to do if you know the process. All right, so, all right, here you have number 9. I want you all right now to do number 9. So pause, right? Go ahead and pause my notes. I want you to box the middle term. I want you to pull the a times c, find the factor pairs, factor the whole thing. And then once you think you have it done, then unpause the notes and let's see if you did it right. All right, so hopefully you pause the notes and I'm going to go quickly do it. So that way you can check to see how you did. So 1 times 18, 2 times 9. We know we're going to subtract to negative 7n. So these guys here, n is going to be a negative 9 because it needs to be bigger. Split this apart. 3n squared plus 2n minus 9n minus 6. Draw my wall right there. Then do my GCF factoring. The only thing I could take out is an n from the first one. So I have 3n plus 2. Over here, it's a leading coefficient of negatives, so make sure you take that negative out. And then we have 3n plus 2. So my answer, those are the same. So I have 3n plus 2 times n minus 3. Did you get the answer? 3n plus 2 times n minus 3. Hopefully you got there. That was really quick. All right, we have one last thing. One last thing I promised was done. One last thing we need to look at because sometimes this happens. So we need to make sure we understand what happens when this happens. So here we go. Let's just try solving this together or factoring this together. Not really solving, it's factoring. All right, so boxing that 4x, and then I pull that 3 and that negative 10 is negative 30. So I have a negative 30 over here. And since it's negative, we're going to subtract to a positive 4x. That's where we have to go. So I have 1 times 30. I have 2 times 15. I have 3 times 10. And I have 5 times 6. So now I need to subtract to 4, right? So 30 times 1 is 29. That doesn't work. 15 times 2 is 13. That's not 4. 10 minus 3 is 7. That is not 4. And 6 minus 5 is 1, right? None of these work. None subtract to 4x. So what do we think happens when nothing subtracts to 4x, right? This means the trinomial is not factorable. If there are no factor pairs that work, it's not factorable. We split that part, that middle, to find those factor pairs to factor it. If it doesn't work, you cannot factor it. If we cannot factor it, the answer is prime. It is prime. I've been watching Transformers with my kids this week, and I keep thinking of Transformers when I say prime. Anyways, so prime is the answer. So you may come across problems that cannot be factored. And if that is the case, then you write the answer as prime. All right, so don't freak out. Just check your work. Always go back and check and make sure you have all the factor pairs. You didn't miss any factor pairs, especially if you have a multiplication table. It can be helpful to go down that multiplication table, make sure you didn't miss anything. But you may very well have a prime answer. All right, we are done with our factoring. It's going to take practice, practice, practice to learn this. So come on Wednesday, we'll practice some more Wednesday together. And then next week on your homework, or Friday when I issue the homework, you'll get lots of practice on doing this. So make sure you show your work, do all the steps. The more you practice this now and the better you get now, the easier your math career is going to be. Because this is one of those things that is challenging and we don't remember how to do. And so the more we can practice, the more stuff sticks in our head. And the next time you see it, you'll start to remember it and you'll be able to do this easily. You'll say, Mrs. Kim taught me this. Yay. All right. Have a great rest of your day.